All right. So, hey, we're excited. We've got a special guest with us, Daniel Shin. Daniel, welcome to the show, man.
Thanks so much, Spencer. Happy to be here with you and Gray talking about real estate.
Yeah, this is, of course, our favorite subject, our favorite topic. And I'm really, really interested. We're going to get into a lot of things today, but I really want to start off with your story. And partly because I'm really interested. I come from a family of physicians. And while my brother and my father have invested in real estate, like your story is really unique because I've never seen anybody like really go into it as hard as you have. And really, I mean, you had a fantastic career. You're a surgeon, board certified surgeon. So why don't you kick us off by telling us your story? Like, why did this make sense to you? Why are you like in real estate so heavy right now?
Absolutely. So, yeah, as you mentioned, I'm a urologic surgeon, board certified about 6 years into my practice. And I got into real estate for a number of reasons. And I think, some of them might surprise people, but some of them will really resonate with anyone who works kind of like a 9 to 5. And um, I think it might surprise people that actually a lot of physicians, especially that I interact with, are really interested in real estate and growing sources of passive income. As it as it relates to my story, I think it's important to mention that when I was young, a defining feature of my childhood was financial scarcity. So we were sort of a typical immigrant family from Korea, and my parents, God bless them, they did as the best they could. But a lot of times during my childhood, we struggled with money. And when you're sort of in your formative years and experiencing that, I think it leaves a mark. And one of the reasons why I ended up going into medicine actually was to try to achieve a sense of financial stability. And by and large, I think that medicine has done that. I feel very lucky and a lot of gratitude to be in a position where I can practice as a surgeon because it has that unique combination of being able to help people while also earning a very good salary. And it's also sort of a respected position in our society for the most part these days. But what happened was that just a couple of years into my practice, picture this, I was in Southern California, living in Los Angeles, but I was commuting 1 hour south to where I worked in Orange County each way. So every day I had a 2 hour commute. And I was in an employed position, which has some frustrations of its own, but I was working pretty hard. So initially, when I first started out, probably about 60 hours a week, plus the commute on top of that. And I had just come out of residency, which is this tremendously time-intensive training period where you don't really see your family that much, you don't see your kids that much. And then I just transitioned fairly quickly into this very time-intensive job as an employed surgeon. So it only took a short amount of time, about 2 years, before I started feeling burnt out. And it surprised me because I was only a couple of years in my practice, and you typically associate the term burnout with someone who's maybe in their late 50s and just counting down the days until retirement. But I was feeling this as an early career surgeon, and I didn't really know what was going on. But I think a lot of it was the hours and the commute and everything like that. But while I was feeling that, I started looking for ways to have new goals. And I was looking for ways that maybe one day that I would be able to have a passive source of income where I wouldn't feel as beholden and feel as sort of reliant on my paycheck just to pay the bills in Southern California, which actually were fairly high. A lot of the things that I did as a surgeon were very typical. I bought a big house, I got a fairly expensive car, and all of a sudden I felt like I couldn't even cut back even if I wanted to.
Right.
And I think that's a position a lot of people can find themselves in, and they never get out of that cycle because you can make a lot of money, but if you spend a lot of money, there's just not a lot of excess there. How did you talk about that? I mean, did you earn more? Like, talk about kind of like, because I think real estate needs margin. And so you need cash and capital to be able to do that. So kind of talk about the golden handcuffs and like being tied to the 9 to 5 and like what you've done to allow yourself to make some of these moves into real estate.
Absolutely. So, a few things happened around that year two mark. Number one, I started turning my daily commute from a grind into sort of like a mobile library. I started listening to podcasts and absorbing content and just filling that time with sort of useful content that I actually enjoyed listening to, and was teaching me about personal finance and eventually about real estate investing. And it turned that commuting time, while it definitely didn't fully mitigate the mind numbingness of a 10-hour weekly commute, it made it a lot better. And I also learned about this world that I had no idea existed before, a world of passive income, financial freedom. And I saw a way out because, as you said, I did have golden handcuffs. So we talked about it as a couple between my wife and I. We're like, okay, we've got this expense, we've got this expense. And, in a lot of ways, once you are living a certain lifestyle, it's very hard to go backwards. So we said, okay, we sat down and we said, okay, which of these expenses do you think we can cut out? And we're like, well, I don't think we want to sell our house. We're going to lose money if we sell the car. We really need the nanny because we both worked. And then our biggest expense was probably this beach club membership, which was like totally ridiculous, exorbitant. But we're like, oh, we love it so much, But I think, it comes back to gratitude because as a dual working couple and with my salary as a surgeon, we mapped out a plan to financial freedom that didn't require as much sacrifice. And as a creative outlet, I started blogging under the name The Darwinian Doctor, and kind of wrote about this, where one of my early posts was about breaking the golden handcuffs and aiming for a level of financial freedom that was a little bit higher than what you might hear typically, and was a little bit more sort of, I think, in keeping with a high income salary type of lifestyle. So I sort of found a niche writing about that and also trying to achieve that.
Yeah, that's very cool. Because I think you hear about the FIRE community. It's like live as cheaply as possible. The reality is living off like $20,000 a year is challenging if you have kids and a family and that
impossible
kind of stuff.
In Southern California, right?
Yeah, $20,000 to pay the light bill, I think, in Southern California. So
yeah,
and we'll talk about the timeline of that plan. I think you hear some people get into real estate and they get financial freedom in 1 year. It sounds like you kind of enjoy your job, but maybe you didn't want to do that for 30 years. What was kind of the timeline that you and your wife set with y'all's financial goals?
Yeah, it's been an evolution, definitely with the goalposts and the timelines. Because when I was first mapping out this plan, I had this 15-year plan completely reliant on just brute force saving into index funds, right? And it was basically a plan where we would stuff as much extra money as possible into retirement funds and also taxable brokerage accounts, and just get there by the 4% rule, which is a common formula in the FIRE community, where you just live on 4% of your investments. And to do that, it takes a long time because you got to let compounding take effect. And it just takes a tremendous amount of capital into the stock market to really securely live on something like that. But about a year after I enacted that plan, I was, of course, listening to a lot of content about personal finance and financial independence. And I realized that a certain percentage of people who were trying to achieve financial freedom were getting there dramatically faster. And the common thread was that they were all investing in real estate. So when I looked into why that was happening, it's because so much of the return of real estate comes in the form of cash flow. And then that cash can directly offset living expenses, which is actually a much faster way of reducing your sort of living expenses, and a much faster way of getting to financial freedom. So as soon as I started to invest in real estate, I sort of rewrote my plan, and it became first a 10-year plan. And then now it's looking like it might even be faster than that, so it's been very interesting.
It's like a snowball effect too, I would imagine. Because I think the index funds is a great way to do it, but it does take a very long time. You have to have a big nest egg that you can then kind of like safely withdraw. And some of the strategies there's ways that you can recycle your capital and use leverage to get there a lot faster. And those are kind of two of the ways in real estate. So you got the cash flow, you're paying down the debt, but you can also add value to properties. And so you can take what money you have, whether you're making a high salary, kind of, like you don't have to be making a high salary for it to work. And I think you can kind of like work across all tax brackets. I think there's just and it's a physical asset you have control over. And so I think you can control and engineer higher returns opposed to a completely passive, vehicle like an index fund.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that initially it was interesting because obviously I was married at the time, and my wife, she's a numbers person. She works with numbers in her day job. And initially, when I was talking about going from investing into the stock market, which is very familiar to her, to real estate investing, she was like, I don't know what you're doing here, but don't use a lot of our money to do it. Okay. So what I did actually to get started was I cashed out about $100,000 of stocks that I had painstakingly saved over a number of years, to really take the plunge. And I said, okay, this is how much I'm willing to invest into this. If it all blows up in my face, we'll eventually recover from this. But if it goes well, this could be the start of something really cool. And a lot of luck. I've been reading an interesting book, The Psychology of Money by Morgan Housel, and saying that actually a lot of success in investing is luck. And thank goodness I started investing in 2018 when everything was just going up. So I don't know how much of my success is attributable to just good timing. I think at some point we should probably talk about what's going on these days,
Yeah, we will do that. Daniel, I was investing in 2005 and 6 and 7. So I know what it feels like to think that and I'm not saying you're doing this, but I felt like, man, this thing is easy. Like I know exactly what I'm doing. And then obviously we had a bit of a hiccup in 07 and 08, but I think go ahead.
Little hiccup. Yeah.
Just a tad of a hiccup. But I think it's really interesting because, I mean, your wife said, hey, I don't know what you're doing. Just take a little money. You somehow convinced her that $100,000 was a little bit of money. You could cash it out because you knew you could recover from that. And I know that so let's talk about your first investment, because that's when you're just getting started out, we found that is one of the toughest things, is for people to go from 0 to 1 and to get over the hurdle of, just paralysis by analysis is what they do. And so how did you do that? Especially you're living in Southern California. I'm imagining you're not going to buy a house there, not going to buy an investment property there. So talk about that decision and that first investment.
Sure. So it was definitely a lot of anxiety leading up to that first investment. And, it's one thing to buy a share of the Vanguard Total Stock Market Index for like $100 or $200. It's completely different when you're buying a house, because most people will eventually buy a house, but maybe they'll buy a couple over their lifetime, and at this point, my portfolio is like 26 units, where there's a lot of like little houses and bigger units and all this other stuff going on. But that first property was really full of anxiety, and it actually didn't really happen until over a year of education. And it is education, you can absorb so much these days. We're in a very lucky part of our world history where you can learn so much by listening to you guys. You can read books, you can do real estate investing courses, and just learn so much about investing from the comfort of your own home or from your car seat during your commute. And it really took a year of me doing that, and then just feeling like I just had to get started, and I had to get that sort of ball rolling. For me, that took the form of a turnkey investment. And I actually bought a turnkey single family home for $94,000 or $92,000 in Birmingham, Alabama. That was my first investment.
All right. So that's my hometown. That's where I'm from. Grace used to live here. So what part of Birmingham did you buy in?
Well, I remember I know the address, which I'm not going to say, but I actually don't know what part of Birmingham it is because I never visited. And I don't know the smallest thing about Birmingham. And I think that was a mistake on my part, because in the end, I ended up, this is the only investment property that I've ever sold, this turnkey investment, because while it was okay, it just didn't do that great. And I think a lot of it may have been location, because as I'm getting more seasoned with real estate, that old adage of location, 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 I'm learning is very true, even as a real estate investor. So it's not only for your primary home.
And so turnkey, for those who don't know, is a company will buy a home, they'll fix it up, they'll put a tenant in there, and then they kind of serve it to you like a rental on a platter. And so you buy like existing cash flow. The home has already been renovated. You hope that there are kind of no expenses. They might help you model out what this investment should look like. It's a pretty low risk way to get into it. Is that kind of why you went that route?
I think so, because one of the biggest risks as a real estate investor is in the renovation. Most of the other properties that I've acquired since then have been using sort of the BRRRR method, which is the buy, renovate, rent, refinance, and repeat method, where you can, it's one of the ways to kind of recycle and use leverage to sort of accelerate your investing. But there's a lot of risk in that renovation, because no matter what your contractor tells you, there might be something behind the walls that is going to cost a way lot more money than you expect. So with a turnkey investment, that turnkey company, they charge you a pretty good premium for it, but they're taking on all that renovation risk for you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so they will take, if they'll likely make a profit on it to account for, the risking their capital and kind of that. But what they give you is, hey, you've got cash flow from day one. Do you remember what the rent was on that property?
Yeah, the rent was about $900 a month.
Okay. So yeah, really close to that 1% rule that a lot of investors use.
It was basically, we were aiming for $900 a month, didn't get a tenant in for over 3 months, eventually dropped it to $840 a month. Still not bad, but the margins were very thin. As we went along with it, some of the tenants were a little rough on the property. We eventually ran into COVID and ran into non-paying tenants. So eventually I made the decision to sell it later on in my maybe about 2 or 3 years into it. And then as soon as we decided to sell it, this was it had a septic tank. And as soon as we decided to sell it, it became sort of this rainy season in the springtime, kind of a freak thing. And the sewer system essentially like shut off. The toilet stopped working because the water started picking up through this septic system. And I eventually had to replace the septic tank prior to selling it, which was the whole debacle. Luckily appreciation rescued me, where I didn't really lose much, if maybe $3,000 or something like that. But it was definitely a learning experience. And I think that there's a lot of learning from every single deal. And if you can get away from it with just losing a few $1,000, you're pretty lucky. So
yeah. That's probably better than an online course, actually. if you spend that much money. So that was your only turnkey property that you bought. So or was it?
Well, actually, number 2 was also a turnkey property. Okay. It was in a different city though. Number 2 was in actually Little Rock, Arkansas. So that property I still have, and it actually does fairly well. But those were the only 2 turnkeys that I did.
Did you fly to Little Rock and see that property before you bought it?
I flew and I met the turnkey company. I checked out their operations. Their operations were actually based out of Memphis, which incidentally I recently moved to literally a couple months ago. But that's another story. But I met them. I was really impressed by their operation. Really friendly, very professional. They had a centralized sort of operation where they had enormous storehouses full of materials. Every single turnkey was renovated the same way. They had still to this day the best property management experience I've encountered. Very informative, very professional, and I think that goes a long way, and it's probably one of the reasons why it's been a property that I've held on to, even though it's sort of the smallest property in my portfolio right now.
I think it says a lot about going and meeting people, because there's tons of turnkey providers you can find online, but I think you probably learn a lot by going and shaking hands and ideally seeing the market. But as long as you kind of like know who's, in charge, who's operating, I think you can probably learn a lot from just that. I think it's kind of like worth the plane ticket alone just to go down there and kind of, shake people's hands.
I think that's absolutely right, because I remember feeling this way, but one of the reasons why I didn't fly out to Birmingham to meet that company was I was looking at it like analyzing the cost of the plane ticket, the cost of a hotel room, the cost of a rental car, and thinking, oh, that much in the context of this investment is actually a pretty big percentage. So I'm going to skip
6 months
that.
cash flow. I'm not going to do
exactly.
that.
And I was, it was a very, in retrospect, a very short-sighted experience, because look at what happened in the end. It wasn't the best property, wasn't probably the best part of town. And in the end, I didn't end up loving that experience, and it cost me money. So it would have been cheaper to go out there and assess things for myself. So yeah, again, good learning experience.
Let me ask you this. We have actually turned a lot of people away when they've come to us. I mean, because we're based here in Birmingham. So we've gotten a lot of investors from out of state have come to us and said, hey, we're thinking about buying these properties. And we've been able to, say, hey, that's a great property, or, maybe you could do better. My question would be, do you think if you would have come to Birmingham and visited, you would have made a different decision?
I don't know. I guess we'll never know. I still think that there's a lot of value in meeting people.
For sure.
But, I spoke to these people at length before I made an investment, and they certainly made a good impression on me over the phone. Would I have been able to tell anything different, or was I just unlucky with that property? There's just so much to know.
Right.
I think probably I had so much desire just to get started that I probably would have bought something, honestly.
You might have looked past if it was a little bit rougher area just because you were excited about it. And you also you don't know what you don't know. And so like you've got a lot more experience now where you probably know the location and the city and typical types of things. You could probably go into a new market and say, hey, I've had these kind of experiences in this type of area and I'm not going to invest here. But it probably would have been, it might have been challenging in your first one.
Yeah. And I tell this to a lot of people now, but, people really agonize about their first deal. And I completely agree. I think I've heard it on, like Bigger Pockets a lot, where they say that you're not going to get rich on your first deal. But in fact, you might even lose a little bit of money, but the amount of experience and sort of momentum that you get from that first investment is worth its weight in gold,
100%. And so after that, where did you pivot? It was Indianapolis next?
Right. So Indianapolis is where the majority of my investment has taken place since then. After that second turnkey property, I basically had the momentum. I had some experience about how at least the acquisition process worked, but I wanted more of the upside. I realized that I was giving away a lot of the upside by going the turnkey model. And I decided that I wanted to take a little bit more risk. So I went to Indianapolis, and I found a investor agent through a referral. And I bought a duplex there that is still one of the like gems of my portfolio. It's doing great. It's in a really up and coming location, just east of Indianapolis, sort of like downtown. And that's where the majority of my investing took place until I sort of pivoted to a little bit of short-term rental more recently.
And so talk a little bit about that, like that transition from turnkey to doing it yourself. Like, was there another hurdle you had to get over, or did you feel pretty comfortable doing it yourself? Or was it like still a lot of anxiety? Like, hey, I'm going to have to buy this thing, oversee the rehab, oversee placing a tenant. I'm guessing you started to build a team, pretty good team.
Yeah, there was definitely a lot more to it than just buying something turnkey. But and I was doing this while working full time, sort of, making phone calls in my lunch break before I got started at work, answering emails after hours. But a lot of what took place was that first I reached out through my network to people in Indianapolis. I interviewed a lot of people, contractors and property managers, real estate agents. And I identified sort of a handful of people that I wanted to meet, and I flew out there. So I flew out there, and by this point, I had a clear vision of what I wanted. And I sat down with some people and I said, look, I'm a young real estate investor, but I'm hungry, I'm motivated, and I painted a picture of what I wanted to build, which is, I jokingly call it like my real estate empire. But I wanted to build a real estate empire that will provide me with cash flow, financial freedom, and a generational wealth, so that I could prevent financial scarcity in my own kids, and try to insure against a lot of the financial anxiety that I had experienced as a child. And I think that really resonated with some of the people I met out there. And then I took that team and I ran with it. But it was challenging because I think a lot of the challenges of doing that as an early real estate investor is trying to figure out the renovation process. Is it really going to hit these numbers? How much is it going to cost? What is the margin of error? And then is it worth doing the kitchen over, or do you just try to paint over everything? A lot of these things come with trial and error, but it helps to have sort of a team to advise you, and also a community of investors to talk to as well.
I think that you did a couple of things right. One, ask for referrals. I think that's like the investor community likes to help out other people. And I'm sure that you would like to get referrals to other people. And I enjoy doing that. I enjoy helping because I want to see other people successful in this real estate arena. So I think that's probably the best place to start, because if somebody else had a good experience, you're likely to have a good experience opposed to just somebody off Google. You mentioned having an investor focused agent, which we can hit on, but I think that's also important too. Like having an agent who understands the end goal. And that was the third thing, is you painted a clear picture and you went to the market. A lot of people don't even do that step, but like when people come to Birmingham, they've got a clear picture of the type of property, what they want, short and long-term goals. That shows us that they're serious, and then they're willing to hustle and kind of follow up. So I think you probably did those three things right. But talk about how you found the property. Was the agent and investor themselves?
Yeah, the agent, I think it was just sort of a good coincidence, but this agent at the time was a few years into her real estate agent experience and was hungry to expand her clientele. She was an investor as well. And we sort of grew up together in a lot of ways. And sometimes that's good, sometimes that's bad, because certainly there are other sort of learning points in my portfolio even now. I say learning points because maybe one of the small apartment buildings that I have right now, I've learned that maybe the location isn't as up and coming as I thought it was, but definitely at least the alignment and goals between myself and my agent in Indianapolis is definitely there, which I think is half the battle.
Yeah, it definitely is. I'd love to hear, just as you started talking about the scarcity mindset, I know from what I've gathered about your story is you did put a lot, like you were investing in yourself. Were you taking courses? Because I'm thinking like with people with a scarcity mindset, typically they just want to save everything. They don't think about investing in themselves. So talk a little bit about that, because I know it's a process, and I know you said you spent about a year learning. Mm-hmm. Were you paying for courses, or was it all free content that you were consuming?
So in that initial first year, it was all free content. It was books. It was reading blogs. It was listening to podcasts. Eventually, this was hundreds of hours of content. Filled my commute, and I think it's kind of saved me because it turned a very frustrating sort of time in the car into sometimes I was sad to get to work because I would have to shut off the podcast, and then I would once I finish my day and get back in the car, I was like, okay, let's see what happened in that investor story, But actually, after my first duplex purchase in Indianapolis, I did take a real estate investing course, which I really loved. It was through the actually a physician real estate couple under the semi-retired MD banner, and I liked it. And the way it was about at the time, I think it's more expensive now a little bit, but I think it was $3,000, which is a lot of money, right? For anyone, and even in a lot of ways, I'm used to spending tons of money on real estate now, but when you're going to spend a few $1,000s on anything, I think you take pause, right? But the way I rationalized it was that after those first few purchases, I realized that I knew enough, but I knew that there was so much more that I wanted to learn about how to better analyze properties. And I also realized that it's a fairly lonely experience becoming a real estate investor, especially if you're in a community or in a position where you're not surrounded by people who are kind of like-minded. And I was an employed physician. Most of my colleagues were very happy, putting in the hours, getting the paycheck. And I didn't have a ton of people to talk to about real estate investing. And I realized that by number one, by doing a course, you're going to get access to sort of this community, which was true. And secondly, I sort of stepped back and I looked at my life and I said, Dan, look at how much money you've spent on education in your life. You have $300,000 of student debt already. So what is another $3,000 if you really want to go into this? So, when I looked at it that way, I said, let's go ahead and invest in a little bit of more formal education to try to do this the right way. And I think it did help. I had some experience, but I did gain a lot from that course.
It's really cool because I think, and I don't know, like you have a website that you have kind of written out your journey, how you've done this. It's called the Darwinian Doctor, right?
That's right. The DarwinianDoctor.com. And I have that website, and I've had really surprising success on TikTok also. So
really?
I actually produce a kind of short form videos on TikTok, and I have about 106,000 followers on TikTok, where I just kind of talk about real estate. I talk about being a doctor. I talk about just kind of money topics. It has really surprised me, but it's so fun. It's like you put these little videos out, and then people react very well. Actually, the majority are very curious. It's like it's a little bit of a younger demographic. My blog is, I would say, the majority of the people who read my blog are kind of like you and I. They're like professionals with some capital to spend, and they're just wondering how to optimize it. But it's been a very fun experience.
So go ahead, Gray.
I have not gotten on TikTok, but I've heard a lot of people can grow on there. Have you made any cool connections on there, or what's kind of your end goal with being on TikTok?
So TikTok is great for growth because it's the fastest growing social media out there, and it is really interesting. So as a lot of my content on my blog is also just about personal finance, about how to maximize your income and plan for financial freedom. And so I've been to the FinCon conferences for a couple of years now. Really fun, great community there. Where essentially personal finance creators get together, they compare notes and figure things out. And last year when I went to the conference, there was maybe a dozen people producing stuff on TikTok. This year, literally every single person had a TikTok strategy. It's really interesting. And I just think it reflects the growth of that medium. And there's a lot of crossover between TikTok and YouTube. So I'm starting to like shove some of my stuff onto YouTube too, because it's a very nice platform also.
Yeah. And I think it's cool to just get people's story out, because I think I resonate with people's stories. I like listening to other podcasts just like this one, but there's more people creating content. There's more people that you can kind of resonate with, like, hey, they're in my shoes. They're 2 or 3 steps ahead of me. So I think it's an awesome thing to be kind of sharing your journey. I think there's a lot of MDs, people who spent a ton of time and a ton of money on that and kind of like want another option out. And this is kind of a fun hobby too. I mean, I think real estate investing has turned into a hobby for me, and it sounds like it's turned into a hobby for you. So I think it's cool to be able to find those kind of like communities, because it can be a lonely thing. Find other people to kind of bounce ideas off and learn off of.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's if you're in a position where you like creating content and you have experience in a particular field like real estate investing, if you can share it like you do through a podcast or through a blog or on TikTok, whatever, it's like you're helping people sort of emulate you and hopefully replicate your success. And for me, as I hinted earlier, I recently moved to Memphis because my wife got an awesome job here, and um, I enjoyed my job in Southern California. Actually, having a creative outlet in the blog and doing the real estate investing, I think really made me appreciate the job in a lot of ways and lessen my burnout. But after 3 or 4 years of real estate investing now, we got to a point where we're maybe about 50% of the way towards our financial freedom goal, which is blows my mind. But I looked around at our situation and my wife's desire to take this sort of jump in her career, and I said, look, I'm employable. We have a lot of we're halfway to financial freedom. We're in a position where we can take this risk. So we packed up, moved out here, and it's a no state income tax kind of place, and cost of living is lower. So I think we're going to look back on this as a really good turning point in our lives. And I still intend to practice full-time urologic surgery here, but fully intend to continue investing in real estate as well, just because I feel like it's such a good way to get to financial freedom and grow your wealth.
And I think what you highlighted, it allows you to take risks and say yes to other opportunities that you might not have been able to do otherwise. And I think that's the part. You're not trying to do this so you can quit your job and sit on the beach all day, but it just creates options where if you want to work, great. If you want to work on a side project, great. Or if you want to have these other opportunities. So I think that's the encouraging thing. I think that's what kind of people chase when they want to get into real estate and get to that financial freedom.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I due to licensing, I have to wait a number of months before I can practice here. I got to get licensed with the state medical board here and then the hospital. Nice. So I've been here for almost 2 months now. And let me tell you, I thought I'd be sitting back, enjoying my time, relaxing, but I cannot wait to get back to work. And I'm, continuing to invest in real estate by sort of polishing our portfolio and trying to maximize the returns, because as you all know, it's a little bit of a interesting time for real estate investing with the interest rates as to what they are. But yeah, I can't wait to treat patients again. It's been really surprising to me that I feel uncomfortable just not sitting around, not working and earning that paycheck. So it's interesting.
Yeah, let's talk about that. So right now, interest rates are 7-8%. It's prices really haven't adjusted quite yet. We're starting to see them come down and starting to see more opportunities. How are you thinking about the market today? Are you still buying? You talked about optimize your portfolio. Kind of talk through what you're doing strategically, kind of both those areas.
Sure. So I think if you have assets already that with locked in 30-year debt at low interest, you're in a really sweet position where you can afford to just kind of sit around and watch what happens. I think, I talked to a lot of kind of early stage investors who are sort of wondering, and I think there are absolutely deals all the time. Even in today's environment, you're going to find deals, but you might have to really focus on trying to find the properties that have dropped in price, or find something off market where you're going to get that at a discount, because the carrying costs for properties is very high right now. Now, I think there's a very good chance that within a couple of years, the Fed is going to stop their march toward recession. We all understand why they're doing it. They're trying to combat inflation, but it's a really blunt instrument, and it's going to hurt a lot of people along the way. So I think if you're early on without assets, real estate assets, you can certainly buy the property well, and then hope to refinance the debt later on when interest rates come down. I think it is tougher, certainly. For me, I have a lot of units, and when interest rates started shooting up earlier in the year, I still had probably 3 or 4 units that I needed to renovate. So that's what I've been focusing on, taking the units I already have and maximizing their income, and just enjoying the fact that inflation is just eating away at my debt like crazy. So I think it is a different story if you don't have assets yet and you're looking to get into the market. I think it's a great time to educate yourself, gain skills through courses, reading, and everything like that, and gather resources to take advantage of the prices when and if they do fall.
Yeah, and
sorry, go ahead, Spence.
Go ahead.
I think it can still be a good time to buy. We're starting to see mortgage rates are completely down, and there's homes are sitting on the market. And so what we're telling our investors that we're working with are make sure it cash flows at 8% debt, because if you fix that in and you can still cash flow, great. And if you can refinance in a couple years in the future, great. Don't bank on, probably don't go on a negative, cash flowing property right now, hoping that you can refinance in a year or two, because we just don't know what the Fed's going to do. There's a scenario where inflation comes down and they're using lagging indicators on CPI, and middle of next year, they start to turn back the rates, but it also could be another 2 years. And so, but I think like you said, like sniping, I think finding really good deals below market that you can add value to, I think that's probably where investors need to be looking. But also you were talking about, hey, I can renovate right now. So previously, if you could get debt at 3%, that is probably the highest and best use of the dollars that you have. But right now, it's probably renovating, increasing the rents, increasing the cash flow on the property. And so just talking about, hey, where you're at in the cycle and where you're at with your portfolio, I think if you're a new investor, continue to send out a lot of offers, analyze a lot of deals, get to know a specific market. And then if you've got assets, now's probably the time to make sure, do some CapEx projects as tenants move out, do some renovations. So I think those are really good tips for investors kind of in both, no matter where they're at in their journey.
And it never hurts to make offers, right? If you find something you want, you can make an offer that makes sense to you. It doesn't mean they have to accept it. Like, you can always make offers.
Yeah. We had an agent today, and he was working with an investor, and the property's listed at 200,000. They went in at 150, and he was like, we may or may not get it, but at least puts us in the conversation, because the numbers worked and they cash flowed there. So they found kind of their strike point at, hey, this cash flow is at this number and I can get it at a steep discount to list price. And so that's probably the strategy. I've seen at least successful investors who are still buying right now.
Absolutely. You never know. And they may accept the offer depending on their situation. And for them, it might be a good deal because maybe they need the cash now or something like that. One last thought I would throw at you is that I've also heard the position that even if I'm getting something at 7% interest rate, which we know historically isn't even that bad, if inflation is running at 10%, you're still going to come out ahead in the long run. You just hold on to that property, that debt gets eaten away by inflation like crazy. So it's the question is, do you have the resources, the reserves to sort of outlast the first couple of years when the cash flow might not be so great? So maybe a little bit more risk right now, but in the long run, you're probably going to do just fine.
Yeah, as long as you got the capital, that's what we always talk about. Like, investing is risky. There are risks associated with it. If you have property for CapEx and you've got money for vacancy and you've got money to pay the mortgages, having a 10-year horizon, it's hard to go wrong there. So, obviously, if you hold it long enough, like, real estate will work out, but also you can play that kind of inflation hedge game and getting debt at 7% with inflation higher. So as long as you got the reserves, I think it's like a completely wise way to do it. So,
well, Daniel, this has been great, man. We really appreciate it. It's been a pleasure, and I just want to say welcome to the South. We're glad to have you down in our neck of the woods here, right next to us.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it's been really fun talking to you guys, and yeah, we are loving it here in Memphis. It's super cold right now for some reason, but we're loving it. Everyone's been so welcoming, and the community's great here. And certainly things are a lot cheaper. I'll throw one last thing, but our property here, very similar house to what we had in LA, literally 30% of the cost, and literally 30%. So
that's incredible. That's some more capital for real estate investing right there.
Absolutely.
So you just freed up some couple more units.
That's great. That's great. Well, good. Well, Daniel, if people wanted to follow you, get in touch with you, we already mentioned the Darwinian Doctor. How else would you like people to find you online?
Yeah, I think my blog is a great place, thedarwiniandoctor.com. All my contact info is on there. And that's been a repository of 3 or 4 years of every single decision I've made with a lot of transparency. But if TikTok's your thing or Instagram's your thing, I'm also there at the Darwinian Doctor. So a lot of options.
Awesome. Well, great. Thanks again. And everybody, will be back next week with another episode of the Evernest Real Estate Investor.